Shalom. Wanna do part 2 to the video. Part 1, I was a little what's the word I'm looking for? Unorganized, but you know, I decided to actually write down excerpts, you know what I'm saying, from this book, Black Indians. But before I proceed, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth in righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners, come back home to the truth. To those that died in Yahweh Shai, the dead in the Lord shall arise first. All right, I want to go more into this book. I'm going to start off this time with a theme of the divide and conquering of our race. You know what I'm saying? The so-called white man divided, you know, years ago, the so-called Native Americans and the so-called Negroes as a tactic that he uses to this day. So you talk about Willie Lynch. Willie Lynch impacted Native American relations with so-called black people or African slave relations too. You know what I'm saying? So to begin with, page 47, it says, in 1615, King Philip of Spain received a letter from his Mexican colony advising him that the division of the races is an indispensable element in controlling his colonies. So the only way you're really going to control your colonies is by dividing the so-called Negroes and the natives. Not only did Mexico's maroon experience prepare its dark and mixed races to march to independence, but it also cast up a leader in Vicente Guerrero, a black Indian born in Ixtla in 1782. Guerrero's parents were of mixed European, Indian, and African stock. All right. Next one I want to go to is page 54. All right. It says, under General Jackson, you know, this is Andrew Jackson, under General Jackson's orders, without a declaration of war, so they didn't even go about it the legal way. General Gaines marched a massive force of regular U.S. troops, Marines, and 500 Creek Indian mercenaries. His mission, as spelled out by General Jackson, was to blow up Fort Negro and restore stolen Negroes to their rightful owners. So they used the U.S. military, which a lot of you so-called Negroes are part of, and Hispanics and Native Americans, and you use 500 Native Americans to restore so-called black people to the slave masters. Right? So it says, let's see, well, what's the next excerpt? Page 55. Oh, here we go. The U.S. public heard nothing about this massacre for 20 years. In 1837, Congressman William J. broke the story. So this was a cover-up. Just like everything the so-called white man does, you know, you got to watch them because them motherfuckers cover everything up. All right? So another one. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Colonel Zachary Taylor, this is page 67. Colonel Zachary Taylor raced after the fugitives with 70 Delaware Indians, 180 Tennessee volunteer sharpshooters, and 800 U.S. soldiers. So these are so-called black slaves. They had to use 70 Delaware Native Americans. You know what I mean? So it goes to show, you know, the white man uses divisive tactics throughout history. So it says, let's see, what's another one? Okay, surrounded by Creeks, Chickasaws, Cherokees, and Choctaws, and whites who practiced a cruel bondage over black people, Seminoles felt pressure at every turn. This is in approximately 1843. All right, so it goes to show the so-called white man hasn't changed, man. You know, you got the tribe of Gad and Edomites surrounding, or you had them surrounding the Seminoles, right? Page 104. The next year, the assembly denied Negro or Indian slaves from meeting anywhere together in groups of 4 or more, or being armed with guns, swords, clubs, staves, or any other kind of weapon. So they had strict laws forbidding so-called blacks and Native Americans. So if the white man's a devil to the so-called black man, he's also the devil to the Native Americans. You can't get around that. We have a common enemy. And we have a common ancestry, whether you believe it or not. Let's see. Okay, in 1740, South Carolina offered Indians 100 pounds, this is currency, for each slave runaway captured alive, 50 pounds for every scalp of a grown Negro slave. So it was basically hiring us as mercenaries against one another. Let's see, page 132. And this is a basic book, man. There's books that I'm going to go into, Lord willing, man. That you can't deny the so-called Negroes and Hispanics and Native Americans are the same people, right? So it says, Plains Indian nations, the Comanches, Kiowas, Lipans, and Apaches became tough, hard-riding people who challenged the European invader on countless battlefields. So we were fighting against the so-called white man. They had no slaves and saw foreigners of any color or language as a danger. For them, Africans brought west by white slave masters were part of an enemy advance on their civilization. So even they had so much distrust that even the so-called white man, even the so-called black slaves that were brought by white people, were looked at as an advance on their territory. All right, let's see. What else? Do I have something else on this? This is page what? 133. Oh yeah, the last one on the divide and conquer tactics of the white man. I mean, there's really a lot of excerpts in this book, but I just really wanted to get to the main ones. But there's really, like, this book is filled with gems, man. For any of you young Israelites that's looking to read about Gad and Reuben and the common ancestry with Judah that they have, this is an excellent book. So let's see. Okay, in 1890, black troopers were summoned to assist in the suppression of the last Indian uprising, the Ghost Dance Rebellion. Really a Sioux religious revival and prayer for survival. It managed to terrify local whites. So the Ghost Dance, although it was harmless, it terrified so-called white people. After surrounding 350 Sioux at Wounded Knee, the 7th Cavalry opened fire on innocent men, women, and children. This is the white man's army, by the way. Black troops were not involved in the slaughter, but the 9th Cavalry had been assigned to herding the ghost dancers together. Right? So that goes to show that I believe the 9th Cavalry was so-called black people. But notice it said black troops were not involved in the slaughter. They didn't want no parts of killing these so-called Native American and African so-called, well, these so-called Native Americans. Now, you know, enough of the negativity. Remember the scriptures say, Judah, my people, Judah and Israel were oppressed together. Now, Israel is the whole nation. Why is Judah set aside from the rest of Israel? Because you had the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, right? Now, this book also documents and goes into us coming together as a people. Right? It says, but, this is page 57, it says, but some who claimed this ownership took advantage of it and sent their black villagers off to hard labor in their fields. Seminole law making it impossible to sell slaves remained firmly in place. Seminole chiefs still married black women and had black military and diplomatic advisors. So obviously they had enough trust for them to give them such high positions and to marry. Well, you know, to marry the women is normal. You know what I'm saying? That's not even, you know, that's not proof. But the fact that they would leave them, they give them such high positions. You know, it's the same thing in Latin America with the maroon camps. You know, or in Latin America they call them the cimarrones. So page 63. Still other Florida Seminoles, Africans, and black Indians set up their own communities. So we were together setting up communities with black, Native American, and Seminole Indians. As they concluded the United States was untrustworthy. So all of us, so-called black, Judah, Benjamin, Levi, Gad, and Reuben, Native, black Indian, and Seminole, didn't trust the white man. Some escaped to islands in the Caribbean where slavery had been abolished since 1834. See that? So the so-called white man, you know what I'm saying, you're not fooling. And you dumb niggas out there that think the so-called Native Americans are not Israelites, you know, fuck y'all, man. This is really for those that can be reasoned with. The rest of y'all that can't be reasoned with, y'all could just fucking drop dead. Alright? So it says, some Africans, this is page 90, some Africans became more than peacemakers, negotiators, and bridges between cultures in the wilderness. They began to identify with their new friends of the hills, streams, and mountains. The new friends of the hills, streams, and mountains were the Native Americans. So the so-called black people and Native American cultures were so able to intermingle that, you know what I'm saying, that we identified with one another. All right. So fast forward to page 100. By the way, this chapter says, the chapter says it all. Their mixing is to be prevented. The first paragraph, the first sentence says, in Latin America, Africans had found excellent places to hide and many Indians to aid them. So the so-called, the natives of this land, right, the indigenous people of this land, helped the so-called black people hide amongst them, man. If we weren't the same people, if we didn't have some type of common bond, why would we be so helpful to one another? Because it wasn't just us helping Judah, it was Judah helping us too. You know what I mean? Let's see. Okay, here we go. The first full-scale battle between Native Americans and British colonists took place in Jamestown, Virginia in 1622. Africans fared a lot better than their owners. According to historian James H. Johnstone, dropping names here, the Indians murdered every white but saved the Negroes. Wow. They killed all fucking crackers but saved the so-called Negroes. I wonder why that was. By the way, if we wasn't the same people. When whites, page 109, when whites argued about the right of private property and owning people and insisted Africans were inferior beings, the Indians usually shrugged no. So the Native Americans disagreed that so-called blacks were inferior. Let's see. Oh, nice. Half a century later, this is page 111, in 1738, Nantucket, Rhode Island residents uncovered an Indian plot, a Native American plot, to attack their city at night and only spare Africans. So we wanted to kill everything in sight except for so-called black people. But you say we're not the same people. But for some reason, we have a history of, even when we're in power over the so-called Judites, having a lot of leniency. You know, we wanted to kill so-called white people, but not so-called Negroes. I wonder why. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Their great fear was prompted by a peaceful community of Pamunkey Indians, many of whom were biracial or free black men and women. This tribe was so-called black. You're about to see the injustice of the so-called white man. It's a Native American tribe, but they were, you know, likely a lot of them was Judites. They, you know, Judites mixed in there. The other white complaint charged these Pamunkeys had allowed their land to become a resort of free Negroes from all parts of the country and a harbor for runaway slaves. So in other words, the so-called white man said that the Pamunkey Indians, I hate the way that sounds, but the Pamunkey Indians basically were a safe haven for so-called blacks that ran away from slavery. It said no evidence was offered for either accusation, but whites asked Virginia's assembly to deny the Pamunkeys their tax exemption and investigate their subversion of Virginia. So the white man was like, hey, these are mostly runaway slaves. So they asked the state, you know, the so-called white man asked the state to deny them the basic Native American rights. Page 133. Oh yeah, I read that part. Okay. The next year, a Mexican general led Biloxi Indians, I believe that's in Mississippi or Missouri, Mexicans and blacks against U.S. whites. He defiantly shouted he had always been free and had no respect for the Salah. Oh, no, this is what I wanted to read. The city of Los Angeles was founded in 1781 by 44 people, of whom only 2 were Europeans, and the rest African, Indian, or a mixture of the 3 races. Maria Rita Valdez, a granddaughter of one black founder. Now, mind you, she was the granddaughter of a black founder, but her last name is Valdez. Owned a section of land we call Beverly Hills today. Francisco Reyes, another founder, owned the San Francisco Valley. In the 1790s, he sold it and became mayor of Los Angeles. The governor of California before the arrival of the U.S. Armed Forces was Pio Pico. Governor Pico came from a prominent California family with African ancestors. Wow. So, you know, we were all in American history, right? But we're not the same people. All right, page 136. Let's see. Oh, okay. This is for you motherfuckers that bring out that the Native Americans owned slaves. It says, but most observers found that the chains of slavery were fitted rather loosely on black people owned by Indians. So the Native Americans that had owned black slaves were very lenient with so-called black slaves. Only the Chickasaws had a reputation for treating their slaves badly, as did the white masters. So that's self-explanatory. You know what I'm saying? So-called, the Native Americans were very lenient on the so-called black slaves. All right, so let's see. Okay, for Cherokees, wait. Okay, it says, for Cherokees, it was a murderous trail of tears. President Martin Van Buren ordered 7,000 soldiers under General Winfield Scott. By the way, a lot of y'all schools is named after these motherfuckers. To move a nation of 14,000. So so they wanted 7,000 American soldiers to move a force twice their size. Homes were burned, livestock, tools, printing presses, and personal possessions seized and destroyed. About 10,000 Cherokees survived, but President Van Buren assured Congress that their expulsion had the happiest effects. The Cherokees have emigrated without apparent reluctance. Look at that shit, man. The fucking white man's the goddamn devil. I'm almost done with this sit down, by the way, but this is gonna, Lord willing, this is gonna be a series. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna go into other books. You know, the history of the Native American Indians by James Adair. Just one of many. You know what I'm saying? You know, there's a lot of history on the so-called Native Americans being part of the nation of Israel. And the Latin America, the so-called Latinos and shit. Not in shit, but, you know, our people. Okay, page 148. Black Indians. I'm still in the same book. At the end of the Civil War, and for a variety of reasons, many Afro-Americans, many so-called blacks, many Judites, left white society to enter Indian nations. Thousands stayed to marry Indian women or men, raise children, and make their living in an accepting culture that was not burdened down with hatreds based on skin color. So us natives accepted the Judites that were coming to be part of our culture. During this time, many so-called white people, well, it says many white people, joined Indian nations. So basically the so-called white man wanted that too. Wanted to be down too. It says, some people of both races were probably attracted by the cash or land offerings the U.S. government made to settle accounts with Native Americans. But beyond these, self-seekers were many who concluded that Native Americans understood freedom, family, and law better than the surrounding white societies of the day. So there you have it. You know what I'm saying? Even the white people that wanted to be down with the Native Americans, you know what I'm saying? They knew damn well we had a better society. All right, now check this out. What is clear is that Oklahoma entered the Union as the 46th state, but not as a haven for people of every race. So Oklahoma was still, you know, it entered into the Union as a state, but it's still racist. Its black Indians could not vote, and its Afro-Americans faced violence if they tried to vote. Dark citizens of the state could not sit with whites in school, public buildings, railroad cars, or elsewhere. Oklahoma became the first state to segregate telephone booths. So there you have it. This is, you know, William Lorenz Katz, Black Indians, A Hidden Heritage. You know, this is a hardcover book. You know, when I ordered it, it's probably, when I say the page, you know, that pertains to this version of the book. You know what I mean? But it can't be too far off. But, you know, with that, you know, I just want to say, man, you know, those of you that believe that Israel is only so-called black, then you know, you're being small-minded. You know what I'm saying? And you're cutting off a big percentage of Israel's history. You know what I'm saying? When you read the book of Deuteronomy, you know what I'm saying? You see the so-called Hispanics and Native American tribes also went through the curses in Deuteronomy. You don't close off the slave ships and say just because of the slave ships. We read about the slave ships that brought Native Americans to Spain. So there's slave ships there too. So, you know what I'm saying? With that, I want to give all praises, honor, and glorification to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Salutations to you brothers throughout the four corners of the earth, teaching the truth in righteousness and sincerity. To you Israelite foreigners, come back home to the truth. To those that have passed away in Yahweh Shai, the dead in the Lord shall arise first. Shalom.